The arts are a large part of education here at Trinity, so it is with great pleasure that I welcome as our keynote speaker for this year's annual Christian Arts Festival, Mr. Makoto Fujimura.
Thank you. This is a wonderful festival. I had no idea that the school had been organizing this for this annually, and my friend Greg Wolf was the last speaker. And as I walked around the gallery, looking at the entries, I was really thankful for your hospitality as a school to initiate culture care. And I have been to various places to speak about culture care values, and what I mean by culture care is a suggestion that we should perhaps move away from culture wars metaphor to look at culture as an ecosystem to steward rather than a territory to be fought over. Culture is not a war to win. Culture is instead a garden to tend to nurture, to prepare the soil for the next generation. So when I speak about these issues, I'm concerned about the state of culture today, that it is so hard to be an artist today, and for someone who has been successful in making a living for many years as an artist, to have this privilege of being able to spend full time tending to my cultural garden and to grow my art. This reality that I experience, and many artists that I know experience, not just in visual arts, but dancers and theater professionals and poets and so forth. We're facing, I think, a type of crisis in culture in which it is no longer possible to have full-time artists anymore. All of us have to somehow juggle and to earn the right to create. And so whenever you can host an event like this, I understand the discussions behind the scenes, and I understand the challenges and resources that require, and so I'm grateful to you for making that possible. And thank you, artists, for submitting the pieces, beautiful pieces. Thank you for that piano playing. Really ministered to us. I am releasing a new book called Silence and Beauty. I've been on a bit of a tour with this book. It's not even out yet, but the pre-release was Calvin Writers Festival, and when I go back, I'll be preparing for an exhibit in New York City starting in May, beginning of May. It goes on for about a month. If you happen to be in New York City, please check this out. Sorry, the letter is so small. It's almost like a eye doctor's test. You have to see how well you can make this out. But you can go to my website and get the information for this exhibit called Silence and Beauty. I'm going to start out inviting you to my studio in Princeton, New Jersey. It's a renovated horse barn. And this is my sacred space. I'm looking forward to going back tomorrow. And I was telling some of you that the moment I walk into my studio, I consider that to be worship. And the way I work, it is literally to slow down, to listen to the pulse of creation, to remind myself that I am deeply connected to this God who created all things, and that this God called all things good, despite the schism, despite our fallenness, despite everything that gets in the way of us toward realizing this full thriving. Every artist knows in the studio, in the rehearsal rooms, and that as we prepare to write that story, that line, that stanza, we are facing this reality of new possibilities. And so every time I go into my studio, I have a lot of thoughts swirling in my mind, but I try to slow down and to listen first to this pulse of creation that has been flowing from the beginning of time, perhaps even before time existed, that our lives are part of this narrative that flows out of creation into our broken lives now. But ultimately we are pulled forward into the future of God's creation, but also this reality that God invites us, broken people, to be part of the story of the new creation. And this excites me every time I think about the realities of creativity and imagination. And no matter what I do, no matter where I am, whether it be lecturing or touring or exhibiting, I always try to invite people into that place, what T.S. Eliot called the still point of the turning world, that place of quiet, that place that allows us to truly hear the sound of creation. The materials I use are traditional Japanese materials, harkening back to 15th century Japan, pulverized minerals, and these brushes and the materials. Most of the materials I use has not changed since that time. And while my pieces, like the one that came on the screen, was on the screen first, it's 7 foot by 11 foot large canvas. The materials I use are basically the same as 17th century artists, limpa screen artists in Japan, 16th century artists. It's grinding up pigments and making your own paint, and then layering them with natural hide glue, which is water-based glue, and then layering sometimes 60 to 80 times before you even begin. And this process, as I said, slows me down to what I call slow art, just like slow food. And it's very much tied in with this ecosystem of Japanese aesthetic that allows us to be part of many, many generations of craftsmen and women who dedicated their lives so that artists like me can work. And it is such a privilege, but it is also a delicate ecosystem that is facing crisis as well. So part of what I do is to raise awareness of this. Even Japanese government has not been too good to preserve these forms of art like paper making and brush making. So part of the reason why I keep using these old materials is to raise awareness of this ecosystem that is being decimated by commercial interests and pollution. And so paper, even 10 years ago, I cannot get anymore. So I have to modify what I do. And these paper makers who began to make paper after the war is passing away. And in some cases, it's passed on to the next generation, but the paper is not the same. So I have to deal with these changes, but I would hope that this kind of ecosystem can continue to be sustained in the future. Here's an old pear tree. Before gold leaf, very thin, microscopically thin gold leaf, Japanese leaf is laid on the surface. I have about 60 layers of pigments underneath it. So you'll peek through the gold. Good gold is almost transparent. So therefore, when you read the Bible and Revelation passages speaks of New Jerusalem, this gold as pure as glass. It's because pure gold is transparent and liquid. So the streets of gold, you're walking on water. Gold, liquid, pure gold. But then I do a rather audacious thing for a traditional Japanese technique. A curator told me that probably this has never been done before. That I layer silver on top of gold and distress it. And you don't do that really because gold is more expensive than silver, and silver will tarnish over time. So you don't want to hide the best part underneath. But as I have been journeying with this theme of silence and beauty, I've realized that the part of Japanese culture and aesthetic is to hide what is most treasured. And so I began to work this way. This old pear tree is in my backyard, and it's starting to blossom now, so I'm eager to get home. And it only blossoms every 2 or 3 years. And the previous owners that sold us the farmland that we live in, and we're so fortunate to be there in Princeton, New Jersey, to be part of this ecosystem. They told us that this pear tree is old and it may not bear fruit again. And the first year we moved in, it blossomed spectacularly. We had so much pears that we didn't know what to do with. They were falling on us as we were trying to get to the top level of the branches. And it reminded me of, it was like a parable to me that for so many people in 20th century, this old tree of Christianity is like a tree that may never bear fruit again in terms of culture, in terms of cultural production. We have been practically silent in terms of creating beauty into the world, to bring something new in terms of artistic expressions that is coming out of the church. And yet I believe that there will come a day when this old tree will blossom again, be fruitful again. So this is my prayer. This is in the only image that I used in the book Culture Care, because this is my prayer that this old tree will bear fruit again. I began to write Culture Care book as a way to advocate for the arts, as a way to help people understand, all people, to be able to frame how we might become better stewards of culture, again, rather than fighting over cultural turfs, why don't we begin to think of generations' work to cultivate the soil, to take care of the soil, to nurture the soil, to bring it alive again, so the seedlings can take root, and rather than be decimated by cynicism and despair, that it will become a soil where the praise of God can resound again, where we can seek after God's beauty again, and where we are liberated from bondage to decay, and in that freedom of children of God, that we can begin to create voice that creation's praise, as my good friend Jeremy Begbie, theologian, has put it. Voicing that creation's praise in our music, in our art, no matter what we're doing, in business practices, in everyday lives, in schooling, voicing creation's praise. So I began to talk about this in my lectures, and I'll share with you some of the passages as I have this in the background. There's a chapter in my culture care book called Cultivating Cultural Soil, and I recount the story of my life. We lived for 15 years in New York City and raised our children there, and we have recently moved out. So this is what I write. I recently moved out of the city, and I have been gardening. I'm a novice gardener, but I have realized that what I do as an artist, as a practitioner of the ancient art of Nihonga, the slow rhythm of creating new work, layer by layer, over a period of time, is very similar to cultivating the right soil for my garden. Holding soil in your hands can lead to a deeper meditation on culture care. Soil is a complex reality. Most of us do not give a thought to the fact that soil is made up of decomposed, dead animals, plants, and insects. I plant my seeds in what is essentially a layered mass of death, accumulated over time. Good soil also contains other things we desire as gardeners: microorganisms, worms, and nutrients that make an environment conducive for seeds to come alive. Apply this knowledge to culture at large. Culture, too, is full of dead objects from the past. A museum is a container for such detritus, though a good museum will make it come alive in contemporary context. Today, shifting market in art and commerce is leaving behind even more layers of cultural death. The difference is that instead of past objects being reanimated in the museum, millions of cultural products now remain dormant or dead in cyberspace and in artist studios. If we assume, though, that winter is necessary for the spring, that death is essential for life to emerge, then a bleak and painful period is perhaps a necessary step toward the cultivation of a renewed culture. As the poet Christian Wyman puts it, quote, "We live in and by our senses, which are conditioned in and by our deaths," end quote. We live in and by our senses, which are conditioned in and by our deaths. Cultivating, plowing, tilling the cultural soil will loosen and aerate the various strata of earlier cultural products and ideas. making their nourishments available to new seeds and leaving our soil ready for the long-awaited thaw. When the seeds of art in our lives are planted in that, and the spring rains come, culture can come alive again. Good soil is essential for a garden. As Jesus teaches in the parable of the sower and the soils in Matthew 13, no matter how good a seed is, and Jesus' seeds are the gospel. There's nothing wrong with that seed. It's perfectly pristine and good. Unless the soil is in the right condition, it cannot produce fruit, and it cannot take deep roots. What Christians call the gospel, the good news, includes a narrative of God's work from beginning to eternity that is often summarized as creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. It begins with God's good, beautiful, and gratuitous creation, and with humankind called very good. But humans broke away from God's purposes in Eden, and our rebellion results in ongoing fragmentation and separation and decay and death. To redeem from the death the creatures he still loves, God has acted in human history through Israel and has come to us himself in Jesus, Israel's Messiah. When Christ returns again, as he has promised, we will see the full renewal of creation and restoration of all things. What's more, if the Christians are correct, the death-defeating power of Christ is now active now. It's embedded in the soils of our culture. It operates through God's Spirit, enlivening his followers. The deep life of heaven is renewing the earth. We are even now, in part, beginning to see God's will done on earth. We live now in the era in which God has invited us, more accurately, he has commanded us to participate in these creative purposes, to extend his artistry and contribute to the restoration of all kinds of disorder, and, I would add, to participate in what I call the theology of making. When Jesus speaks of the seed, he is speaking toward this reintegration and this theology of making. The new reality breaking into a brokenness through the Spirit. It is characteristic of God's work that restoration, renewal, and this making grows from the smallest and most unlikely beginnings. I see God as the ultimate artist, and we, still bearing God's image even in our fallenness, as artists writ small. The Bible is a book written by the Creator God, that's spoken through God's creative, is sometimes broken, yes, people. It is designed to recalibrate our worldview and reconnect us toward the Creator. Only then can God's power work through us, and we fill creative and lovingly the roles that contribute to God's work of restoration and new creation, which is part of the purpose for which we were made. And by that, we will thrive. Our current culture, often called the culture of death, is full of pointers toward the first two of these elements, creation and fall, but only rarely reflects, even in our churches, the full story of God's love and his ongoing work toward our full thriving. I have noticed, as an artist prone to be looking on from the margins, that churches often present the middle two, fall and redemption, but rarely connect the whole story of the Bible or the deep restorative life now active in the world with the stories of our present lives and communities. We often misuse this great book, reducing it to a book of rules a checklist for earning our way into heaven, or a guidebook for material prosperity or personal well-being. Many churches replace God as an artist with God as the CEO of the universe and turn to business metrics to measure their success at meeting bottom lines. Christian communities are thus often busy with programs, but rarely seen as a creative force to be reckoned with, let alone as a power of good that affects the whole cities and gives everyone a song to sing. But as we more and more become gatherings of diverse people journeying together, as we learn truly to love each other without all of our differences, we may help prepare the condition in which God's good seed may bring forth new cultural life. So I see in the parable of the soils to a specific kind of culture work. The new life the seed carries is beyond our capacity to provide. But we can and must contribute to the soil in which it will grow. That is our work. And our efforts can affect the seed's fruitfulness. Culture care thus prepares the way for the gospel to spread. The tilling of the soil is the most important task we can do to prepare ourselves and our children for the seeds of the gospel that God sows so lavishly. Beauty can sometimes break through our bedrock's assumptions and prepare us to consider possibilities beyond the broken wasteland of our world. And my wasteland vision, my fallenness, how that, even that brokenness can be a starting place. Of course, there are thorns, the worries of this life and deceitfulness of wealth that Jesus warns us, that compete with the good seed and make it unfruitful. Art and other culture care work can sometimes thin out such weeds, releasing a full generative potential of God's seed. So I go on here about the soil. As a novice gardener, I talked to a lot of farmers at the farmers market, and I realized a lot of times they only talk about the soil. They teach how to prepare the soil, and the conversation turns always to soil, the importance of the soil. This is a soil that my art has come out of, and this is my mentor and my dear professor, Professor Kayama, arguably one of the most important 20th century Nihonga artists, certainly one of the three pillars of great artists that came out of 20th century after the war, after the wasteland devastation of Tokyo. Came out this beauty. Screens at 6 foot high by, I would say, 18 feet long. This work was shown at the Limpa exhibit, at Freer exhibit in Washington, D.C., and I stood in front of it with my wife, recording the precious time that I was able to learn under him as part of the doctorate program, a lineage program at Tokyo University of the Arts. And thinking about how he connected 17th century beauty into 20th century post-atomic Japan. Thinking about how bold that move was to even begin quoting this old tree, and how successful he was at proclaiming this message of Japanese beauty beauty born of sacrifice, beauty that is integrated with nature. And these materials, Nihonga materials that are used in the same way that his parents created kimono designs in Kyoto. He worked to build these patterns in, to weave in this narrative, this journey of a 20th century journey into the future. I'm also influenced, this as part of the soil, the 17th century work of Tohaka Hasegawa, master painter of 17th century, friend of Senno Rikyu, the tea master. And this work, which if you are fortunate to see it, it will be displayed at Tokyo National Museum in Ueno. And they only display it once every year. And I would go and stand in front of this mysterious work, probably painted with one single brush, with calligraphy ink, sumi ink. Very simple, that's it. Very simple materials, and yet a profound reality that is breaking through these pine forests, through the fog. And even in this poor reproduction, you can kind of sense what the artist was after. He was after the sound of silence. And he was painting this image, which is radically different from his other images, as an homage to his son, who he just lost. His son Kyuzo was also a fine artist, and he died when he was 23. In Lament, he began this painting, which will become one of the greatest masterpieces of Japanese art. And out of this lament came out, I believe, a reality of Japanese beauty that flows out of trauma, flows out of lamentation into and sacrifice into what we know to be Japanese beauty. And so these are the soils, soils of perhaps death, that layers of accumulation, and yet they are bearing witness to us today. And these soils are fertile with so much that even we in America can gain from. I was commissioned to do this task of illuminating the Four Holy Gospels. In 2011 it came out. It took me about a year and a half of semi-sequestered work to do 5 large paintings and 89 head letters, illuminating each of the chapters. This is the frontispiece called Tears of Christ. And this was an enormous privilege and extraordinary commission. And when I got a phone call from Lane Dennis, the head of Crossway Bible, who publishes the ESV Bible, I didn't know him, but he has been following my work, my career for many years, and he knew more about the influences. He knew about Hasegawa and Kayama, and he knew about Rothko, and he knew about all these artists, and actually he knew more about me than I knew myself. And and he said, well, I just want you to know that a commission like this has not been given to a single artist in 450 years. Okay. That's not intimidating. But see, here's the problem, right? If you're a visual artist, you're depending on your forefathers to help you to get to a level of expression. And there's a gap for 450 years, that between scripture and our understanding of theology and the Bible and visual expression, there's this huge gap. So you really can't go about it with, this idea that, well, there's this work, there's this master work by this artist, and, I can build on that work. You have to go back to the Book of Kells, Book of Hours, Fra Angelico, perhaps, and of course Barry Moser and William Blake. But they were never given this kind of commission, which is hard to believe. But I did some research and found out that he was right. So what my colleague at Brehm Center, Bill Dernis, says of visual theology has not been developed for 450 years, especially in Protestant circles. So there's a huge gap, and I was thinking the only way that I could do this is to go rely on Japanese art. And you might be thinking, so you're borrowing a foreign language to depict the Bible. Isn't there something wrong with that? And I say to you, well, read Exodus 32, and you find out that even God's holy temple, Moses' tabernacle, the Spirit of God came upon Bezalel and Aholiab to build with specific dimensions that God has instructed. When Moses received the Decalogue, he also received these instructions to build the tabernacle. And Bezalel and Aholiab were trained in Egypt. Their craftsmanship came out of Egyptian technology. And so I thought about bringing everything I know about Japanese beauty and technique, Kayama Sensei, as beauty of 17th century Rimpa screens, Hasegawa's work, everything into this work. So the four images, this is Consider the Lilies from the frontispiece of Matthew. This is from Mark. It's called Water Flames. This is from Luke, called Prodigal God. And all these were made in response to Japanese art, thinking about theological realities, what the Bible speaks of. This one's called In the Beginning, John. So there are each of the chapters, 89 chapters. And as you can see, there's margins to be illumined. That's 148 pages of illuminations. And I got to design everything from the typesetting to, I have full artistic control, so spend a lot of time thinking about each page, each chapter, literally trying to weave in a story that will make sense visually. And I tell young artists this all the time, the more ambitious the project, the bigger the project, the more challenging it is, the more ambitious the project is. Narrow your focus, give yourself boundaries, limit yourself. And out of those limitations will come creativity. When we are young, we try to do everything in a single page, and we find out very quickly that we thrive, our creativity and imagination thrive within limitations. It's very important. But I was so overwhelmed with this project that I decided to pick the shortest passage in the entire Bible. Anybody know what that is? Right. Jesus wept. John 11, right? And But I have been meditating on John 11 for the past 3 Lenten seasons, and every Lenten season, it seems, I keep going back to John 11 and John 12. Jesus wept. And I decided that in this context of our brokenness and lack of language, visual language, of visual theology, I would stick to the shortest passage of Jesus wept. Jesus tears for us. What I write in one essay as his useless, wasteful, extravagant tears that will flow into the gaps, into the fissures, fragmentations, polarizations of our time. And this is the letter N that begins John 11. Yes, it's abstract. You can hardly tell that it's an N, but N is there. And when I sent it to my publisher, I said, "Is this okay? Because you may not be able to tell that it's an N." And they said, "Oh, they can figure it out. Don't worry about it." So when I exhibited this work in several museums, one is the Museum of Biblical Art in New York City, which no longer exists, unfortunately. It's a beautiful space, and they designed this whole exhibit around King James Bible and illuminations, and you can see the trajectory of how the aesthetic the visual aesthetic began to disappear about 400 years ago, and because prior to that, the Bible was illuminated with this rich, actually materials that I use, gold and jewel colors, and the people dedicated their lives so that they can work on illuminating the scriptures. When I exhibited all 89 letters at once, and some of them have overlaps, like A, comes out a lot, T comes out a lot. So I thought about each chapter and treated them differently. But when I put them all together, I was astonished to find that John 11, that N, that abstract N, is literally holding the still point of this movement of letters throughout the chapters. And so I found myself thinking about the next generation, how we might be able to prepare the soil of culture for the next generation through this still point, this N of John 11. Here's the exhibit at Mobia. And this is the last page. I love this page. It was the last page, so I was relieved to get there. But it's the tree of life that is wounded still. So I talked about culture care, and I'll finish with this story. This is my backyard in New York on 9/11. This devastation that I faced for next decade every day as we try to recover from that day. So much has happened. So much has come out of the world has changed. And this is a picture taken from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. A friend of mine who's a composer took this from his rooftop. And recently, there was this interview of a French journalist who was captured by ISIS troops, and he was held hostage for 8 months. And he was released. His name is Nicholas Hannon. And he was released, and he gave an interview on radio. And it was astonishing to hear what he said of the enemies. And he writes about this, but in this interview by NPR, he talks about how, as he got to know the people that captured him, he realized that the narrative they're speaking is echoing ours. They are actually just mirroring what we are saying about them. So they're not necessarily having this original cultural place from which they are defining their opposition. They are simply mirroring what the West is telling them, that they are our enemies, that they need to be destroyed. And he says this: if we adopt a militaristic, warlike vocabulary, there is no way back from that. We will only strengthen our enemies. So I didn't realize when I wrote Culture Care that this will have huge impact and ramifications in this specific pragmatic reality that we face today in the world. And here's Nicholas Hannon speaking about this. And he says this. He talks about imagination. Just because we have no imagination, he scolds us. We cannot just tell beautiful stories, create beautiful characters, beautiful heroes. But this is what we have to do, because in our world, in our societies, what do people want? They want to become heroes. They want to be famous. They want to be recognized. And this is by lack of recognitions that youngsters from our countries are joining ISIS. Just because they want to become someone, they want to be somebody. Our society don't give them a chance. So we have to create our kind of heroes. We have to kill the narrative, creating our heroes and not using the codes of the enemy. And we are totally failing in that. Even the TV report that what we're doing on ISIS, what do? We're just using their propaganda pictures. This is totally wrong, he says. I wrote in Refractions a long time ago after 9/11, I said this: the Columbine High School incident and 9/11 taught us that we can either use our imagination to destroy lives or to save lives. On 9/11, we had, on one hand, militant hijackers who took their imaginative vengeance into determined evil acts. On the other hand, were firefighters who climbed the falling towers. We have to realize that before any of these acts were committed, they were imagined. We swim in the ecosystem of imagined actions. We do have a responsibility to that power. We do have a choice between saving lives or destroying lives. If we do not teach our children and ourselves that what we imagine and how we design the world can make a difference, the culture of cynicism will do that for us. If we do not take the initiative to love our neighbors by imagining better neighborhoods and cities, despair will take the imaginations of their children and turn them into destructive forces. T.S. Eliot, one of my mentors, I consider him to be, said, if we take culture seriously, we see that a people does not need merely enough to eat, but a proper and particular cuisine. Culture may even be described simply as that which makes life worth living. Now, this is a shocking statement coming from the 50s. He was writing to his friend Bertrand Russell, Virginia Woolf, to James Joyce. And to them, this must have sounded so alien. But I think Tia said it is right. Culture may even be described simply as that which makes life worth living. You see, we're supposed to wake up every day looking forward to something that we create that day, or something that will feed us and nourish our imaginations. But today we wake up in the morning, most of us, full of fear, full of anxiety, full of brokenness, and sometimes we are so numb we don't even feel anything. But a thriving culture is that which makes life worth living. What a definition of culture. And Eliot will go as far as to say, I think, that culture in general is this way. So the destructive part that we all take part in, that is antithetical to how the soil of culture works. It is a reality, I admit, that the tainted soil of culture, this poison that is within our soils, will make us believe that there's something wrong with the mechanism, the origin of soil itself. Right? But there is this overwhelming evidence that if the soil conditions are made right, that things do thrive, and it makes our lives so much more about looking forward to what we create, looking forward to what we encounter that day as receptors of cultural reality, than to see culture in terms of destruction, in terms of cynicism, in terms of suspicion, in terms of all the things that we associate culture with today. So a school like this is a soil that is abundant with potential. A school like this is a place where students and parents alike can come and look forward to one Saturday where rooms are filled with creativity and imagination, where there are resources available to every single person to do exactly this, which is to make life worth living. So instead of cynicism and despair, instead of looking at life with fear and anxiety and even despair to such an extent that we may even consider ending that life, either ours or our enemies, we should consider this. We should have this ambition. We should have this this goal, this North Star, as a place to begin, to educate from this point forward, that every student coming into these doors will see themselves as artists, as creators, as imaginators toward the future that ought to be, that they can be resourced, they can grow, however their giftings may be. Some of them will be artists. That would be a fine byproduct, but really, the arts education and education in general is to make us rich, full human beings that can go into the world, this world of conflict, yes, but knowing that there are, as we work hard to prepare the soil for the next generation, that they can plant themselves in this soil and grow, and then this possibility that they can be part of being a gardener of culture care, being a steward of the ecosystem of culture. So that is my prayer for you this evening. And I want to thank you for listening. And I want to also congratulate again the artists and all the students who participated today. Thank you.